Alright, I've been meaning to do this for way too long now. Let's actually get into it. This is the first part of I don't know how many videos this is going to take to fully explain everything that I know about hours of service. Anyway, the basic gist of it, you see 4 clocks there. You have the, we're primarily going to worry about these 3 for a moment, because those are the 3 that are really the biggest deal. So the drive clock is 11 hours. You can drive up to 11 hours in a single day before you enter violation. The shift clock is 14 hours. You have until that clock expires to run your 11-hour clock down to 0. So in other words, you can only drive for 11 hours within a 14-hour window from when you start your shift. There are ways to pause that 14-hour clock. We'll talk about that later. The cycle, it goes by a number of other names. We call it a 70 because it's a 70-hour, 8-day clock, or if you, for whatever reason, work for a company that's not a 7-day operation, it's 60-hour, 7 days. Anyway, we're gonna stick to calling it a 70-hour clock, though. You cannot be on duty or driving, any combination thereof, more than 70 hours in an 8-day period. Asterisk, without entering violation. The reason there's an asterisk there is because you can be on duty, and this is the same story with the 14. You can be on duty as long as you want, and in fact, there are times that you are required to be on duty that would make no fucking sense, and that half of us don't even abide by. But anyway, you can be on duty all you want, but the moment you kick over to line 3, the driving line, you enter violation if those clocks are expired. So, a little bit more terminology, real quick, before we move on. Actually, no, I'll go ahead and address this 4th clock. You must take a 30-minute break. It used to be stipulated that it had to be line 1 or line 2, which is off duty or in the sleeper berth, before you complete your 8th hour of time after coming on duty. The regulations have since changed. That 8-hour clock is now, you must take a 30-minute break from driving. Notice the change in terminology. So sitting on a dock for half an hour on duty also counts as your 30-minute break. But you must take a 30-minute break from driving within the first 8 hours of driving. It is no longer from the moment you start your duty day, it's from the moment you start driving, and that clock pauses every time you stop. Except not really. Disregard that last comment. Anyway, it's within 8 hours of driving. So, a little bit of terminology real quick. This is going to necessitate we'll look at yesterday's graph. You'll hear me refer to lines 1, 2, 3, and 4. You might also occasionally hear me say something like line 5. These are stacked in order. So line 1 is off duty, line 2 is sleeper berth, line 3 is driving, line 4 is on duty, and if you ever hear me say line 5, that's off duty driving or personal conveyance, and that literally in this software it shows up as a intermittent line on line 1. So notice something here. All those are totaled up. It must equal 24 hours. If you total all those up, if you're ever running paper logs, and you come out to a number that's not 24 hours, you did your math wrong, guy. So this has actually got a little bit of wraparound from yesterday, from the previous day. I was sitting off duty for a little bit before I went into the sleeper berth, just bullshitting around in the driver lounge because I was at HQ at the beginning of this graph. There's about 7 or 8 hours of line 2 when I was actually sleeping, 15-minute pre-trip on line 4, and then all the driving and whatnot that you see. I actually did pick up fuel yesterday, and that is reflected. You must have a remark there. So, simply put, you start your day at 8 in the morning, start pre-trip. That clock and that clock start ticking. 15 minutes later, you've satisfied all the requirements of your pre-trip, everything's in working order, you've submitted your DVIR. And you start driving. That clock starts ticking, and that clock starts ticking. Let's say you choose to run your clocks the way I do. 5 hours later, you stop, take your 30-minute break somewhere, have some lunch. That clock resets. That clock keeps ticking. That clock stops. That clock stops. You drive for another 5 hours. Obviously, everything's ticking again. And about the 10th hour, you start searching for parking. You're parked by the end of the 11th. That should be damn near 0. That should be anywhere between 0 and 3. That is no longer relevant. And that one is only important in that that's how much time you have available to you for the rest of the week. There are little tips and tricks to extend the life of that 70-hour clock. We'll cover that in another video. And there are ways to pause that 14-hour clock in the middle of a shift. We'll cover that in another video as well. Otherwise, the general basics is everything I just described. You can reset this clock by going off duty or sleeper berth, any combination thereof, for 34 consecutive hours. Basically a day and a half, but not quite, because the FMCSA has got to be weird like that. For most of y'all, that's all y'all ever need to know. We'll come out with a part 2 here shortly that delves into some of the finer tips and tricks that us drivers have refined over time to extend the lifespan of that 70-hour clock and to pause that 14-hour clock at will, so that way we can do whatever we really want to without ever entering violation.